an illusion, my dear, caused by reflected light in the eye tubes. And yet, in a way, Tobor is alive. For even though much work remains before he's completed, he is already a sentient being. The sentience may be synthetic, but is there nonetheless. A necessary adjunct to the recording of all experiences our human space crews may later encounter.
A sentient being? You mean this thing can feel?
Well, let me put it another way. Even in his present unfinished state, Tobor will react to emotional stimuli. Janice, help me with a little experiment, will you? Gentlemen, I assure you there's no collusion here. I'm merely going to ask Mrs. Roberts to approach Tobor and feel friendliness toward him. Think goodwill, as it were. You can do that, can't you, Janice?
I'll try.
All right, then, go ahead.
Welcome to edition number 6 of Crafted, the show. You know, it's a podcast, but it's a video cast. But I guess it's all podcast these days. I don't know. On that note, I do have a sponsor. How random and wonderful is that? Podblade. If anybody wants to go look it up online, podblade.com. If you're really interested in having a podcast, but you have zero interest in developing the skills to do it, Podblade is just for you. Very, very affordable podcast editing. Very, very fast turnaround. Very impressed by it. Rebecca Shaw is with us today. Rebecca Shaw, actually, interestingly enough, we met years and years ago when she was interviewed on one of the shows that we had on our live streaming radio stuff before anybody cared anything about any of this stuff. And I really I had Podblade back then, Rebecca. But enough about that. So thanks, Ron Reeve at podblade.com. They're all the way up there in the New York City. So that's kind of cool. So check them out. But joining me now is Rebecca Shaw, the one, the only. She hails from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, which if you're not familiar with South Carolina, which a lot of people are not, is very, very, very close to Charleston, South Carolina, but very different. It's a very different vibe. Rebecca is a hypnotist, which I'm just so excited to talk about because I know nothing about hypnotism. I know a little bit. I know what people read about hypnotism, but I've never actually been hypnotized. And she's also a mindset coach, which makes perfect sense. I mean, who better to be a mindset coach than the person that can actually change your mind? Does that make sense?
Well said, boy.
Yeah, there you go. Right? Write it down.
Right.
Put it on the business cards. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really great. The weather here in South Carolina is gorgeous right now. It's spring. It's sunny. It's 80 degrees, I think. So, and I'm healthy. So I'd say I'm doing pretty good today.
Yeah. I mean, as far as pandemics go, it's not so bad. I mean, if you're going to have pandemic weather, this is the weather.
Right.
Right. Soda a couple of days ago, Dorian Clark, and I thought, man, I would just, if you're going to be in a pandemic, be in Charleston, South Carolina. It's already bad enough. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell everybody a little bit about Rebecca Shaw and what you do.
Yeah. So I am a clinical hypnotherapist and a mindset coach. I've been doing this work for about 25 years. I started a practice in Southern California, and then I've been here in the Charleston area for, since 2006, so about 14 years. And I opened the Charleston Hypnosis Center. And I also just founded an online school, the American Hypnosis and Coaching Academy, to teach people virtually and certify them in coaching and hypnotherapy. So
great, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's my world, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So you started off in hypnotherapy in California. Where in California?
So I was in Orange County. I moved out there in early 90s, and Southern California back then was like the hotbed of alternative health, which was such a contrast, boy, because I came from DC, which is very conservative. And I was struggling with depression. I'd been through counseling for probably just related to some childhood things growing up. And my dad was an alcoholic, and I moved to Newport Beach. I was a half block from the beach. I was driving my little VW convertible. I had a great job. I was an engineer, actually, an environmental engineer. So I went out there to clean up the smog in Southern California.
Right. How'd that turn out?
Yeah. So I got involved with the hypnotherapy for myself, and I had been told that I was stuck with depression. It was biological. I was told that by a doctor at UVA, where I went to college. And so when I had this huge breakthrough, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this stuff. And I was doing computer programming at the time in that engineering job. And I was like, okay, so I want to stop programming software for, actually I was doing this big, huge program for the EPA, their environmental air pollution database. And I was like, okay, I love that. I'm helping, but I'm walking outside and I can't see that I really changed anything in the smog situation. So I went back to school and I trained at Orange Coast College for a certification in clinical hypnosis. And then I was like, okay, this is like upgrading software for people's mind. So it was this really weird sort of transition, or there felt like some organic transition from computer programming software to helping people with their software. And I love it. So
that makes so much sense to me. You know, I'm a very I'm a systems person. I see the world through that lens, and I can appreciate that other people don't, right? So if you've been a software engineer, or if you're just real systems driven, those principles, I mean, you can't look at the world, not see it that way, and not look at it, try to improve things in your mind. As we were talking a little bit about before we got on, we kind of touched on it. It's like, there's a tendency. It's like, oh, I can make that better. I can improve this. I can, the ability to the knowledge and awareness and the confidence to be able to manipulate the world around you. And I mean that in the most positive sense, manipulate the world that wants to be manipulated, right? And that kind of gets into the hypnotherapy myth, right? Is that, the hypnotist is going to put you under and they can control your mind and they're going to manipulate you. But that's not true. I mean, so tell people, because you're a clinical hypnotist.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe help people understand what the distinction between your maybe run of the mill, coffee shop barista hypnotist and your clinical hypnotist.
The coffee shop hypnotist. That's hilarious. Okay. So I want to circle back to what you said about systems, but I will just first dispel the myth. So there's stage hypnosis, and some of them do, have a clinical practice. I'm just pure, straight up clinical. I don't really enjoy like hypnotizing people to, go out and feel like it's 1999 or, that they're going to bark like a dog. Although I do have a funny story about that with a client, but people do wonder, is stage hypnosis real? Yes. And the key is, if you've ever gone to one of those shows, you'll remember, or if you go to one, they start out with, they bring so many people up onto stage, maybe 20 or whatever. And then before the actual show starts, he's already, I say he, because it's typically a man, I don't know why, but he'll start working with people. Maybe it's that authoritative thing, I don't know, but so then by the end, there's maybe 6 or 8 people that are actually in the main part of the show. And then by the end of that, you'll see maybe only 1 or 2 people are really the star of the show, because the hypnotist can tell who's responding, who's not. And how I look at it is like, it just strips away your inhibitions the same way like a bottle of tequila might, so it just does that for some people, is it strips away their inhibitions and they'll be up on stage dancing like Madonna or something.
Okay. So, and a clinical hypnotist is going to do.
Yeah. So a clinical hypnotist is really doing at least in my work, it's a combination of coaching in the first part of the session and then some hypnosis. So the purpose of the coaching is to identify where your mindset, at least in mine, is where your mindset is holding you back. And that touches back to what you said about you like looking at systems, right? So your thoughts are a system, a way of thinking that supports you in whatever you want to achieve in life and how you think about yourself. So it's a whole system of your belief system. It's your belief system, right? So my job is to listen to what you would say your problem is, and I'm able to hone in on your system of thinking and where it's holding you back. So limited beliefs, negative beliefs, lack mentality beliefs. And so then I go, okay, well, that one's not working for you and that one's not working for you. And you're like, yeah, they're not working for me. So then we'll say, okay, now close your eyes and I'm going to make a recording for you. And typically that recording will have positive suggestions that are what I call upgrading the software. So up leveling the belief. Okay, well, you don't want to believe that you're limited in this job, that you have to stay in this job to make enough money, or you don't want to believe that you have to work 80 hours a week to make enough money. And so we will collectively start discussing, what are you willing to believe instead? And I say willing because it has to be, you have to get the buy-in. It has to be a belief that you're willing to accept. And it works best that way if it's in your words and you're like, yeah, I want to believe that I can work less and still make as much or more. Okay, great. That's going to go right in your recording. So that's kind of how it works.
So I imagine it's a progressive thing. It's kind of like the chiropractor.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yes. That is a great example, because I'll have people that come in and they just want to have one session. But would you ever just go and for one session, one chiropractic visit or one session with a private trainer at a gym?
Right.
No, you've got to go for several sessions or over a period of time to adjust your back, strengthen your back into the spinal alignment you want it to be. You go with your trainer for 3 months to strengthen and get you to that goal. And it's the same with your mind. It's like a muscle.
Yeah.
You've got to work at it, and but consistency pays off. The chiropractor kind of analogy works for me because the alignment alignment. Yeah, I love that.
I know that if people are, because I usually work with organizations, but organizations are made of people, right? They're small business, medium-sized business, whatever it is. It's people. And usually if there's a problem, it's because there's a misalignment between what is desired and what is perceived to be, right? One's expectations and one's experience at any given time, right? So if there's a disparity there, right, it creates tension, it creates dis-ease, it creates all these things. It's misalignment, right? And so the idea is to first determine, well, what is the expectation? Help us understand where you want to go. How would you know you got there? How would that feel, right? From a systems perspective, that might seem a little bit weird for people to, when I'm talking to them, well, you're a systems guy. Why are you talking about feelings? Because feelings are everything, right? That's how we know. That's how we get on in the world. And so I can definitely appreciate that. So just the first step, is coming in there and saying, hey, listen, here's a change that I think I may be willing to make, and you help them make that alignment. And then, hey, maybe that opens them up to more possibilities. I imagine people become more willing with time.
They do, definitely. Typically the second session is so much more relaxing for people. They know what to expect. They know they're not going to be knocked out or feel out of control. But I love what you just said about, like, we work very similarly because you're working at the level of mindset. Those questions that you were asking, how, what would that look like? How would you feel? Those are the exact same questions I often ask. Yeah. So
maybe that's what I need to be, is like a business hypnotist. Is that a thing?
Well, you could, absolutely. Yeah, hypnosis would be one tool in your pocket to accelerate results. That's basically what it boils
I'm
down to.
up. How many students do you have right now in the
I'll be starting my next level 1 training in May, so I'm going to talk to you about that.
Sold. I'm in, but you got to have like a business hypnotist certification just for me.
Okay.
I'll pay extra good money to lock that down.
All right.
Good. Everybody just seen you say it, so
Okay.
I'll hold you to it. All right, cool. Well, that's super exciting. I find that wildly, wildly interesting. Which is, as I often say during these interviews, is the point, right? I'm having fun, and this is interesting. And if you're having a great time, that's also nice. But so you said I can't really go any farther because I know that earlier you had alluded to a funny experience, and if I go farther, people are just going to be like, ah. So talk about that real quick.
Okay. So just the canned typical question I get out when I tell people what I do. It's funny. I actually get a lot of clients when I'm out at restaurants or at parties and things like that. Because the minute I tell people that I'm a hypnotist, then it just sparks these hilarious conversations about, basically dispelling people's myths or misunderstandings. And so, frequently someone will say, are you going to make me bark like a dog? Right? You're not going to make me bark like a dog, are you? Or because I'm single now, Boyd, it is hilarious how it comes up in the dating scene where I was literally on a first date and I told the guy that I was a hypnotist and he went, "You're not going to hypnotize me right now, are you?" And I'm like, okay. So it's fun. It leads to just fun and laughter and actually some really cool stuff, because even if they don't work with me, they, it's just stretching their brain a little bit to understand what hypnosis really is. So with that said, I was in the office. I had a client. I'm in a executive suite setting, and I'm in there with a law firm and an esthetician, and so these two ladies, best friends, signed up to quit smoking together. And I let my first client out. They come walking down the hallway. They sit down in the chair. And the one woman is like, oh my gosh. And I said, what just happened? She goes, I just had the most crazy experience. And I said, well, what did you see? What happened? And she said, I'm sitting in the waiting area, which is the collective waiting area for everybody's business. And she said to her friend, hey, Linda, you don't think she's going to make us bark like a dog, do you? Right then, a dog started barking. And her eyes got really big, and she's like, what?
She's a witch.
Yeah. And so she jumped up out of the chair, ran down the hallway to find the source of the barking dog. And it was my attorney friend, Suzanne, who brings her little lap dog to work every day. And I just thought that was so hilarious. Like, I couldn't have, queued up the dog barking right when she said that. It's just, that's too funny.
Well, it's people are not interested at all in what I do, right? So I really don't know what it's like for people to be really interested in what you do. Well, I think you have, on one hand, I'm sure that there's the, kind of the novelty component of it, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly, I guess, somewhat toxic to the industry in terms of people's interest and things. They've got to get over that hurdle, right? You're going to make me bark like a dog. You make me cluck like a chicken. You're going to make me run around naked. You can make me call my ex and apologize, those kinds of things, right?
Get your deep, dark secrets, that kind of thing.
Right. You're not going to do any of those things. And so, but at least that has created kind of this interest in the masses, right? And what a hypnotist really is and does and how they can help. I don't enjoy any of that interest at all. So I'm terribly jealous. But so I am fascinated, because this is such an amazing time to be a hypnotist. I have no idea whether that's true or not, but I imagine that people are, because we've slowed down, because distractions, I think, ran their course in the first 4 weeks of this thing, people are starting to, I don't know, slow down, actually think, spend some time with their own minds, analyze themselves, and ask that question that, well, what am I going to do next? Well, what am I going to do next also requires you to ask the question, well, who am I going to be? Who can I be?
Yes.
Who would I like to be? Because there is no changing the world out there without first changing the world inside. I mean, it's just, and if one wants to get truly esoteric or extremely deep and, the simulation theory or the holographic model of the universe or something like that, we could say, well, everything technically is inside. It's all gray static until it's been interpreted by the senses. And so however deep you want to go there, keep it simple. You have to make changes in yourself first. And I don't know that a lot of people really just kind of automatically know who to turn to be able to help them to do that. I mean, certainly there's a lot of goofballs out there that aren't certified in anything that will say they can help, but you really can. So are you getting a lot of interest from folks right now?
Yes, it's really kind of emotional for me to really tap into that collective anxiety that's going on. If you go to my YouTube channel, I actually posted something on the, now is our time to co-create, when our whole vision of what we were thinking our future was going to be, maybe it's a business you own or a place you're going to live or whatever. Like, we have all this uncertainty, and uncertainty is a huge trigger for people's anxiety, massive. And so I was coaching with one of my clients, and so we started deep diving into the layers beneath that. So you're uncertain. She's in the food and beverage industry, which is huge here in Charleston. So she got laid off, and but she's trained as a coach and has never, done the work. So underneath uncertainty was fear around money. But what blew me away, and I've now heard people tell me this, is underneath the fear around money is something even deeper, Boyd. And it's, what is my purpose in life? What is going to give my life meaning? And I think that question is coming up because everything that we've perhaps relied on to give our lives meaning, our jobs is one of the hugest things, And if you lose your job and you identify yourself, your identity is so wrapped up into that job. Who am I now if I don't do this work? Who am I if I don't have money? And that's really profound. So it's birthing a lot of deep soul searching, and one avenue for that is through hypnosis, because hypnosis is really a state of focused concentration that allows you to go deeper with clarity into your own inner knowing and wisdom and your data banks. And so I think that it's one avenue for people to demystify the purpose, and where they're going with life. And so that's been what's really profound for me is seeing that there was something deeper for a lot of people beneath money fears.
Yeah. Ditto. So much of the stuff you're saying, I feel the same way. I'm very hopeful that people will choose, because I feel like it's a fork in the road. I feel like there's still a lot of people that are holding on to this idea that things will return to what they were. And in a sense, they will. When you're talking about the larger structures, right? The larger structures will be there, and there will be avenues of distracting yourself, just enough to be able to keep from having to think about this. And eventually you'll assimilate into some sort of set of behaviors that will define you. And maybe you won't be put into this kind of a situation again. Or, right, the other path is to say, you know what, I am going to, it's a tough thing. I mean, you know this, and I know this, because we must have been through this personally to appreciate it, I think, to the extent that we do. Self-discovery is not a very comfortable process. It's a very anxiety-ridden process, and you have to willingly engage it if you're going to be successful at it. But what's fascinating about it is that once you've engaged in it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but once you've engaged in it, again, this is my perspective. right? Not anybody else's. But once I engaged in it, it became easier, like anything else. And honestly, I can't imagine a life that isn't really truly characterized by unfoldment, right? By change. That I feel truly is being self-directed. I often kid that I feel like I live my life a little bit. You ever see the movie Being John Malkovich? You ever
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I feel like. I mean, I really do. I feel like John Cusack in John Malkovich's head. You know what I mean? All the time. It's that kind of double layered approach to everything. There's the creator part of you, and then there's the experiencer part of you. And anyway, I understand how complicated that is. And if people choose that path, it's a tough path, but it's the most rewarding path. That's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah. So, I mean, I resonate with everything that you just said. I questioned a few years ago, the thing I asked myself is, said to myself is, maybe everyone's not a seeker. Like, I think you're born a seeker. I'm born a seeker. I can't stop my desire to seek, to learn, to personally develop. But I don't know if everyone is wired that way. And maybe some people are, but they're so stuck in survival mode. They're just trying to survive the day that, they don't go to that place. So I think that's part of it. I think other people want to evolve, but they, like you said, they're afraid to go there, or there's something blocking them from doing that personal assessment or evaluation or in-depth consideration of, how or what's keeping them stuck. And I think a huge part of it is emotions. Like, it was a huge breakthrough for me personally, being a very sensitive person. Some people call that being an empath. It just means highly empathetic person. It's almost like if people relate to that, you feel the world in 3D when everybody else feels it in 2D. So you feel emotions more profoundly. And so then it's like, when we feel an emotion like anxiety or fear around, any challenge in life, it's like, oh, the knee-jerk reaction in our society is like, oh, we don't want to feel that. So we go watch Netflix, or we drink, or we eat, or whatever we do to avoid feeling. But if you can sit with that emotion, anxiety, for example, and this is something I was just going to create some training on, but if you can go deep into emotion, I was talking with a client yesterday who's had had a panic attack about all this. She's at home, she's not working, she's isolating, and she had this feeling of foreboding. And so I took her through a process of, like, instead of just sitting with that, it's like, okay, ask yourself some questions. Is that feeling, am I picking it up from someone else? And it was really funny because I had just spent time with a friend of mine a few days before that, and I had that same feeling, and I knew I had picked it up from him. He was worried about all this. And it was just like I caught the flu, but I caught the worry. I caught that feeling. So I asked, when you have an emotion, is it mine? First of all, is it mine? Or did I just...
Great question.
Yeah. And then the second question is, if you go, no, yes, it is mine. I don't feel like I absorbed that or sponged that up from somebody else that I've interacted with. Is it baggage? And what I mean by that is it, based on something from my past, a past experience that's kind of clouding my situation? Or is it intuition? Is it instinct telling me something bad's about to happen? And where I really taught myself to go through this process is I was actually scheduled to be on one of the flights, actually Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon on 9/11. Yeah.
You're kidding.
So no, I scheduled the flight. I was using miles, American Airline miles, and they gave you several days to actually, book it and say, yes, pull my miles out, because I was coordinating it with my husband at the time so we could fly together, but he's paying for his ticket and I was using miles for my ticket. So I had to do separate reservations and all that. And then this voice just kept saying, I had a feeling that just kept saying, change your flight. And I ended up changing it. But more importantly, after it happened, I'm like, oh my gosh. So I was afraid to fly every time. I had panic attacks about getting on a plane.
Right.
And so a lot of the processes I teach people, it is through my own suffering that I'm like, dang, I don't want to be this. I don't want to have this anymore. So I got to figure it out. And then I teach other people how to figure out their stuff similarly. So my point with all of that is, on your road to personal development and feeling more powerful in your life and happier, you've got to dip your toe in those mucky emotions. They are probably, to me, the most untapped resource of wisdom that people have that they don't know they have, the avenue to tap into wisdom.
Yeah, you've said so many interesting things that I'd like to be able to kind of pull together. Being an empath, I've never really identified as such. And a friend of mine, Liz Guthridge, was giving us, I don't like taking the, like, the personality tests. So I have a struggle with them, right? Because just the concept of it, right? It's almost like, AA. I've got a friend who's been sober for 17 years. And he volunteered to me the first time I met him. He was like, I'm an alcoholic. I'm like, oh, Jesus, and like,
label.
It's 17 years, and I'm like, give yourself a break, man. Maybe you're over it. I mean, I'm not an expert or anything like that, but that I feel like this idea that you're, once an alcoholic or whatever, always an alcoholic is totally inconsistent with a lot of things that I understand about, this, at least certainly a more modern, up-to-date understandings of human psychology, behavior, brain science, etc. And, but that's who he is in his mind. And so I've always kind of shied away from anything that's going to tell me I'm this or that, because, it's a box and I don't like boxes. So she gave me this test and I took it, and I'm telling you, it was one of those tests where it didn't make heads. I couldn't make any sense of it. Right. But I did it the best I could, try to make sense of it. And I turned it in. I got the results back. I couldn't read the results. I had no idea what they meant. So she sat there with me and interpreted it. And it, it was did a little bit of this stuff, but then I was, as high as I could score on empathy,
Oh,
but
wow.
I've always been like, because I've had, I also am single, and this is a lot to do with probably I get called robotic, right? And the thing is like I feel deeply for other people. I very quickly can sense where they are. Empathy being defined as the ability to build in your own or develop in your own mind the mental model of another person, right? That being the definition of empathy. I feel like I have a pretty good ability to do that. So this kind of confirmed that. But what was interesting, what it said was that you intellectualize, and it basically said I intellectualize the emotional experience, right? So it wasn't that I wasn't feeling it. It was that the feeling wasn't going uninterpreted. I'm always kind of analyzing it and calculating it and figuring out exactly what it means. And I guess for whatever reason, I just become adept at it. So that got me. I just, so there you go. Anybody who thinks that I'm not empathetic.
Well, you know what's really interesting, and I never thought of this before, and you described empathy really well, by the way. I like that definition. I'm going to have to write that one down. But so your process of dealing with an emotion that might be stressful is that you go into a narrative about the emotion, like, oh, I'm feeling really anxious right now, and I'm going to rise up out of the feeling in my body, and I'm going to go in my head, and I'm going to see how I want to think about the anxiety. Is that what you do?
It's like observing. I become emotionally detached from it and just look at it.
Right.
I really thought I kind of took for granted. It's tough for people.
So that's like a really quick, fast response to the emotion that gets you out of the emotion, right? So what if you sat with the emotion and let the emotion tell you the story? And a lot of times it's not real. Like I was having anxiety one time about going for some elbow surgery, and I had been mountain biking, and I just had some little tiny fragments that the doctor was going to take out. And So I was having anxiety attacks about, what would people consider a very minimal surgery. And I was sad about it. Like, this is easy. This doctor's adept. It's going to be in no motion going up into my head and like trying to rationalize it as my response, my strategy to deal with the anxiety. And then I decided that I needed to just listen to the anxiety. It's like a kid coming in and telling you a story like, Dad, there's a ghost in my closet. Well, that might not be real, but you got to deal with that. So I dropped down into the anxiety and I was like, what's the story here? What is the story? What's the narrative? And boom, I went back to remembering having surgery when I was age 6 and 9 in New Jersey, where at the time they didn't allow parents to stay overnight with the kids. And so I was having this irrational but founded fear about hospitals. And as soon as I got the narrative, I was like, oh, that's where this is coming from. Okay. And I was able to just totally say, yes, they can intellectualize, but then they're missing the opportunity. And so in that moment, that was baggage. That's what I called it. It was old stuff, telling me that hospitals weren't dangerous. And as soon as I knew it was my 6-year-old self and my 9-year-old self saying that, I'm like, okay. So there's a missing step there, is I guess what I'm trying to explain.
Sure.
That sometimes we do when we intellectualize.
Yeah, I feel
that's
I say I feel. I feel like we're having a session. Is what I feel like.
No, I can't help myself. I'm sorry, I do that.
I look, listen. This is like heaven to me. I love this stuff. This is just so much fun. One of the most probably because I'm almost certainly like OCD, but again, I've never actually allowed myself to have anybody. I've just had 1,000 people tell me, right, that I'm obsessive about things. And I'll sit there and overanalyze and I'll rabbit hole something very, very quickly and then go incredibly deeply about it. And I could get myself emotionally in trouble with that. And the thing that seriously, this in line with a lot of what you're talking about with that your 6-year-old self, 9-year-old self, or whatever it is, one of the best things I ever heard was, and it clicked to me so immediately, was there is no past, there is no future. There are only memories and expectations. The mistake that most people make is allowing their expectations to be dictated by their memories. And as soon as I heard that, I mean, it made a lot of sense. When I analyzed it, it was this, there is actually no past. There is no such thing as the past, right? There's any individual's memory of that thing or a perspective that may have been captured on film or something. But you can't actually say, well, this is the past, right? So there is no objective past. There's just one's memories of the past. Well, what are memories? Well, they're not, let's call them real, right? They're just recordings. They're events and emotions tied together, and they get very complicated. So I felt that kind of freed me up to be able to just look at them as opposed to re-engage them. Emotions or things like that may be from the past, because it was this idea that, and maybe if we got really esoteric about it, right? This idea that thought and emotion combine to create, and if that's true, to what extent am I being, to what extent am I consciously in control of the thoughts that I'm having and the emotions that are paired with those things? And if I believe that actually is part of the creative or co-creative process, if you will, I can look at my future and have some degree of certainty about it, even though, right? Who is certain about anything in that regard? So that has helped me tremendously. I can appreciate that's not everybody's path, but this stuff is so fascinating to me because, and I feel that this, or maybe you agree, maybe you don't. It sucks to see somebody in a really painful situation and not be able to help them. To say it breaks your heart, especially when you feel like If
Yeah.
only they would. If only, right? But people have to make their own decisions.
So I agree with everything you just said. The past is their stories, subjective stories, but they can be emotionally charged, and the subconscious mind is wired to protect us. So if something in the past felt painful, then the story is, don't go to hospitals again because they're painful. So we're wired to have those stories, the collective stories, to keep us safe, for physical survival, and I think mental and emotional survival. But I think from what you said, what it just makes me also think about, and shifting to like an inspirational side of this conversation today, is you can use your stories to create, I believe, to create your future. Mark Cotton, he combines, a lot of his conversation is law of attraction and physics. And he talks about collapsing the wave. And I am not really good with physics, and I don't really understand it, but there's some part of me that just on this very like kindergarten level of that understanding, is that the more I think something, if I'm worrying and there's an emotion with worry, then I feel like I am contributing to, I'm collapsing the wave, I'm creating, I'm drawing to me that outcome, that reality. And so because I'm aware of that, the minute I catch myself going in, dipping my toe into an anxious story, I'm like, no, I am not going to put energy into that. And then I'll pivot and say, what do I want to think instead? What do I want to have happen instead? What would be cool to have happen instead? And through all of this, I have been doing that. I've taken this downtime while we're shut in to really push myself to go into the stories of reinventing my life after all of this is done in a better way.
Right. Well, and I think that's what everybody really should be doing. And one of the things, and they should engage you very quickly. One of the things you just said, again, was just so, it just really, it's such a small thing that we kind of, we just pass by so quickly very often when we're having these kinds of, conversations with people, is this idea that, well, if you could just think something else, right? But I have found in my own life, and certainly whenever I'm working with other people, there's this kind of odd devotion to whatever that feeling is. That it could be an unwelcome or welcome, doesn't really matter. Whatever the present set of circumstances or feelings is people feel like they can't just abandon the negative, right? Well, it's not that easy, they say, right? And I try to help them understand, as I understand it, which doesn't always work, but it's not real. You understand? I mean, this is the reality we have for sure, but it's not as real as you think it is. I mean, if you can appreciate that by the time you're experiencing anything, by the time your brain has had the time to interpret it, it's already the past. You can't live in the now. That's an impossibility, right? The only thing you can do is manage what's next. Well, with every moment that you spend in a given emotion, you're necessarily determining what's next. You're drawing deeper into that wave, right? So lending energy, as I think you said, to that unwelcome emotion or that unpleasant sensation. And it really is as easy as letting go, abandoning the thing. You have no, there's no level of responsibility or devotion to that thing. It's not, I don't know. It's not like a child, you're going to leave it by the side of the road, if you want to come back and pick it up, you can. That's a terrible analogy.
Well, from what I hear you saying, how my idea with that is that, my understanding of knowing what I know about the subconscious mind is the reason we don't let go of worry is because the subconscious believes there's a payoff or a benefit. If I worry about things, then I'll somehow avoid the pain, I'll be prepared for it,
Hey, if you're Catholic, you know what the payoff is.
Right. That's funny.
Right. I agree with you. Yeah. So what do you, because we got to wrap it up, unfortunately, because I could go on forever. And I'm sure you could too. And I'd love to have more conversations with you because this is a lot of fun. What are your words of wisdom, your words of calm, comfort, peace, assurance to people out there right now that are listening to this during this whole COVID-19 crisis?
If you're feeling depressed, a lot of people don't know that depression is, my perception, not always, but oftentimes, depression is a way to stop feeling anxious. It's like anxiety, go, anxiety. And finally your mind just wants to shut down a lot. I want to sleep because I can't take this anxiety anymore. So if you're feeling depressed, consider if you're in chronic anxiety. So go to address the anxiety first. Okay. So, and if people are feeling anxious, it's primarily, the number one reason is their anxious narratives, their stories. So if you can take charge of the narratives in your mind, the things that you're telling yourself and about whatever your challenges are, you can't just stop feeling bad. You have to stop the narratives because your body doesn't know the difference between imaginary story and real thing happening. So become what I call rebelliously positive. I've said this before, like I'm a rebel when it comes to being positive. It doesn't mean, I have had so many challenges in my life, but every time I'm like, dang it, no, I refuse to let this get me down. I am going to find some way to think of this in a humorous way or positively. And the more that my mind wants to take me in the ditch, the more rebellious I get about forcing my mind to go to stories that are neutral or positive or hopeful. And it's like a muscle. So, if anyone needs help with that, they can, find me at RebeccaTaylorShaw.com or Charleston Hypnosis Center.
That's super cool. I love that. Be rebelliously positive. People like to be rebellious, right? Rebellion is sexy. Be sexy. Delete.
Right. Don't buy into all your negative BS. Rebel against it, right?
Right, exactly. I love this. So how can people get your hypnotic tequila services?
So you can find me. I just started posting on YouTube, but more RebeccaTaylorShaw.com.
Okay, so RebeccaTaylorShaw.com, and how would they find you on YouTube? Just type your name in and they'll find it?
Yep, Rebecca Taylor Shaw, and I pop up first thing. So.
Okay, well, that's awesome. Well, any last words before we go?
Never, ever believe you're stuck, ever. Ever.
Yeah. Amen to that. Awesome. Rebecca Shaw, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a great time. This has been fun for me. I hope it was for you. Everybody, thank you so much for watching / listening, whatever you chose to do with this. This has been crafted number 6. I was supposed to show my hands. My running thing is I've got 4 left to figure out what I'm going to do when I get beyond 10. I'll figure something out. I have full faith. But thank you so much, everybody. Join us the next time, whenever that is, and have a great day.